All right, we are back here on the podcast, following up on the offseason think tank already because the Mets did one of the big things in their checklist. Juan Soto is a Met. Joining me once again to discuss this situation, Martino Puccio is back with us. Martino, how are you?
Doing great, Mike. Little short on sleep because of obvious reasons, but yeah, just a momentous sort of day. I want to go see this. This will be good for the podcast too because you like to do movies. I want to go see Interstellar in IMAX. Just on the re-release.
Yeah.
Was hoping, just to kill some time because we sort of knew it was either Saturday or Sunday or maybe even bleeding into today, Monday, for this move to get done. And then you see the Andy Martino tweet, you see the Bill Madden tweet pop up, and I also believe it was Mike Puma of the New York Post. They all had that common denominator of the Soto or the common denominator of covering the Mets in some capacity and the Soto signing coming to a blow. I think that was kind of the final sign of like, oh my goodness, like we're gonna find out here. And it's kind of Mets sources saying it. You kind of heard also the Heyman stuff of which was totally bizarre in a
Right.
way of the level of confidence between the Red Sox, Yankees, and the Mets, where the Red Sox weren't so confident, the Yankees were confident, and the Mets are in the middle, much of like what Steve Cohen's tenure has been like. You don't know that much until it happens.
Yeah. Bill felt right about that situation because, like, and Danny Martino also said on SNY later that night, he's like, yeah, like the Yankees felt good. It's about 3 o'clock on Sunday. Then all of a sudden, Steve Cohen came from the top rope and just dropped his Godfather offer. So, like, there was no shot the Yankees were going to match that. And, like, you look at the contract details,
Hmm.
it says on the service level, 15 for 765. Yankees offer 16 for 760. Neither deferred money. 3.5 million AAV difference, which is obviously not a ton, but
No.
look at the fact the big difference is that after the opt out in year five, Juan Soto can take the Mets can void it by adding an extra $40 million to his contract per year for a year. So it's basically a 15-year, $805 million contract. We speculated off the air. It said that like if Cohen goes to 800, that probably gets it done. That's basically exactly what happened.
That's essentially what happened, yeah, too, because this isn't really in the power of Juan Soto because or the extension side of things, right? With the opt-in. That's sort of really just on the Mets, very similar to the Garrett Cole deal that we saw this year, except there was no extra year given to Cole. He just opted back in, I believe, and just remained within the contract itself. For the Mets, I mean, this is you're paying for 26, 27, 28, 29 and 30 for Juan Soto. Again, that's just a hitter. That's he's going to be 30 when that contract is done. Again, with the type of hitter that he is, he's going to age gracefully for sure. It really just depends upon positionally on where he'll be at DH, first base. Because the move is eventually obviously going to come. I think he'll be able to manage in right field. We'll see what happens in center, and then Nimmo's obviously your left fielder. So again, you're really just now getting what potentially could be the best Met of all time.
Yeah. The best bet of all time is certainly a strong possibility here. You mentioned, I want to show your content here, the Mets have never had an MVP winner for Soto, along with Francisco Lindor, a strong candidate to break that streak soon. And
Hmm.
wild to think here, too, that again, like this is a seismic shift in the baseball landscape where, like, for years, the Yankees wanted a guy desperately that they're going to get that guy.
Yeah.
And now we have now seen somebody, and you can say, too, with the Dodgers, really wanted him, they would have gone over
Yeah.
the top. But, like, now there are two teams in this sport who can go outbid the Yankees if they want somebody badly enough. And that's something that's crazy to think about.
It is crazy to think about. I think more so with the Mets, the Dodgers were always that premier team. And this is always the funny thing if you really go back to the start of what New York baseball truly was, even prior to the Mets existing and the Dodgers and the Giants moving out west. Sure, the Yankees have always been the team. They've always had the most wins. They've always had the best players. But the other side of New York wasn't always as awful and laughable as the New York Mets have been for the majority of their existence, right? The New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers were also some of the best teams in Major League Baseball. That's why it was such a huge decision to have them move across the country, right? Like the Giants were successful during those years. Obviously, it took them a while in California to win, but New York Giants baseball they were great. They were winning constantly. And the same goes for the Brooklyn Dodgers. They had a bunch of great players and great teams and successful championship title winning sides. That's the thing. When the Mets came into the fold, they were always embarrassing. There was always a stomach for another great team in New York, and that's always kind of why the Mets were so frustrating over all those years because we hear and see those resurface comments from the Wilpon era now that are much easier to digest when Juan Soto signs for your team. But when you have Jeff Wilpon and Fred Wilpon making excuses about signing players and oh, I haven't seen too many teams that do great with players, $30 million a year players on their side when we see the Dodgers doing what they're doing, regardless of inflation, right? So to me, just to have of what is supposed to be a fully capable and fully operational, functioning Major League Baseball franchise in New York that's not in the Bronx. And that's finally what we're coming to at an impasse here with the Mets is that they have, at worst, a top 10 GM in the sport. Or sorry, a Pobo and David Stearns. They have an owner who is willing to back almost every singular move, eat money on some bad decisions. They also have some guys on their roster from past regimes that they're able to get money off of the books. They're still going to have money off of the books soon. That's like the crazier part. There's still other guys that will have the contracts up. And to just have that now where, you know, we kind of knew it was different in free agency over the early years in the Steve Cohen tenure, right? Because I always like to add context to it. You saw Yankees fans not provide the proper context in that it's like, oh, Cohen never got the big fish. Cohen never did this and Cohen never did that. If you look through the context of every single free agency offseason and the best players available, and logistically, the chance that the Mets had to sign said players, like, who was the guy? Who was the guy that they were supposed to get that they should have gotten or could have gotten or had a great chance of and didn't?
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody. Every single time that someone appeared in free agency that was a great player, a top player, it would have been, right, Shohei or Freddie Freeman.
Yeah. Or
Or
Yama.
even Trey Turner to an extent. But Trey Turner, it didn't matter because they have Francisco Lindor, because they traded for one of the best shortstops of a generation, one of the best middle infielders of the 21st century. So there was no reason to sign Trey Turner, right? There was no reason to go after the Corey Seagers of the world. You have a Yamamoto who never threw a singular pitch in Major League Baseball. And Joel Sherman said this yesterday on the New York Post podcast. They live streamed after the signing, and Sherman was saying, when the Mets got to 325, which was the offer that the Dodgers had, they said, stop bidding any higher. He wants to be a Dodger. End it there. And and that's funny because they still sent in a record amount, just like they put in a record amount with Verlander and Scherzer. Yeah, the top starting pitchers in the markets in recent years have been on the older side of things like Max and him. So there wasn't any like bona fide ace that had been proven, like I guess you could say Corbin Burns, Max Fried at this point in time. There was never that player. And again, you go with Otani as well. Otani had no interest. It was geographical. So again, you kind of say, okay, Cohen really didn't have that opportunity to do that. There wasn't this free agent that was willing to sign anywhere for any amount and only truly, not only truly cared about the money, but primarily was after the dollars. And the Mets position themselves. And you know this really does go back to the decision in 2023 to sell off at the deadline and hit the reset button and change things. And I think that would go down as, you know, one of the smarter moves in Mets history. I just keep seeing all the parallels from the stuff that happened in the 1980s where the guy's jersey that I'm wearing right now, Keith Hernandez, is eerily similar to Francisco Lindor, and acquiring a signing that really changes the perception and inside the clubhouse of this future Hall of Famer MVP candidate that completely changes your ball club. And then the white whale arrives. And the white whale in this instance is Juan Soto. Back then it was Gary Carter. Because you knew at the end of the day, Gary Carter and Juan Soto are going to be Hall of Famers. And as long as they're healthy and on the field, they're going to be some of the best players and hitters in baseball. And they just have this sort of clutch gene. We know what Gary did, I think, in one of his first Mets appearances. He had a walk-off home run. Juan Soto is one of the clutchest players that we can remember. We saw what he did in 2019. What just happened with the Yankees in this 2024 playoffs wasn't exclusive to that playoff. Soto has been doing this since he's a kid. And that's the sort of player that they also need on top of Francisco Lindor, right? This sort of guy who doesn't care about this Mets perception, doesn't care about how the Mets are viewed in this sort of negative idea that they're little brother, they're losers, and rightfully so for all those years. And again, I think Steve Gelbs tweeted this last night because there's so much to go into this. We've been fans for so long that Steve Cohen, after I believe they clinched the NLDS about eliminating the negative perception of the New York Mets from the fans, getting rid of that PTSD, that Mets fan fear that I had up until the final buzzer with this signing. And it's just great because now job's not finished. We have a lot of players to sign. World Series still needs to be won, and the Dodgers are incredible. But this really is that sort of seismic shift. If you live in this town and you live and breathe New York baseball, you know what just happened. That is no joke. This isn't some sort of like, oh, the Mets did a really good job, but the Yankees still run the town. And the Yankees do to an extent. But now this is not this like the Yankees are up here and the Mets are down here. If
Yeah.
anything, it's here right now. And the Mets' ability to go above the Yankees, even if it's not, complete perception of who the better franchise is. No, it's about who is best set up to be successful for the next 5 to 10 years and even beyond that. And the Mets have a great chance to do that. It's not to say the Yankees don't. The Yankees easily could retool. We'll see what Cashman does and all those other guys. But again, what matters here is that in every single box that you want to check off for what makes an organization great and what makes an organization have a great outlook, the Mets check the boxes. It's an owner who's willing to spend and is invested, all the little details, right? David Stearns, Hobo, Mets development team. I mean, they keep hiring all these smart people all around baseball. And again, they have a good major league roster and they're willing to go out and sign these players. Uh, just every single facet of the New York Mets right now is trending towards a first class organization. And I think they're there already, if not.
Yeah, it's also wild too because you read some of these stories about how Steve Cohen pitches free agents too, and like
Yes.
it's not even just the fact that like he has the most money and says, "Oh, like
Yeah.
I want this, like I'll give you the more than anybody else." Like he does like little detail things, like where we heard that like when they're out all on the meetings on the West Coast, like they all like a lot of them met at Boris's compound. Steve invites Boris and Soto to his mansion, and he's bringing out basically like like a adequate amount of servers to bring out like Latin food for Soto. He brings in the travel
Yeah,
secretary.
Alex Cohen was there. I believe that her father was also there, who's a mega Mets fan too. So
Yeah.
it's just like all those little details. I'm not sure if you saw the part I think John Heyman was bringing up as well in his article. He references Steve Cohen and the Mets just basically finding out that there was a security guard at Yankee Stadium that didn't really allow any of like part of Juan Soto's family to be in. It kind of sounded like a power trip from the security guard, but it's all those little details that the Mets find out and know, like, hey, that won't be a problem here. If you want to bring your family in here, as long as we know who they are, it's totally fine with us. We're worried about our culture and, moving in this direction that, we want to satisfy our players. We want them to have a place that they show up to work and they enjoy being here. Because you see that with Francisco Lindor and his family and his two young girls there. Just across the board, the Mets just get it. They just get it, and it's like that's just as rewarding as winning baseball games. Is
Yeah.
that they're a first class organization that you don't like mocking, that you don't have to point fingers at and laugh at. In
Yeah.
contrast to the football team that we root for, right? It's
Oh,
just
either
you
football,
don't
really, at this
you
point.
just yeah, you just don't have any worries of like when you see the Mets pop up or a notification in the news, you're like, ah, shit, what now? What do they do now? It's kind of like, yeah, what do they do now as in a positive spin? Like, what do they do now? Is it Sean Manaea? Is it Pete Alonso coming back? Like, what's gonna happen? It's exciting. There's no angst, there's no negativity, and it's just great. And sure, yeah, they have to go out and win a World Series now for the first time in 38 years, but just to get to this point is just so exciting. It's exhilarating, and there's been very few moments outside of winning baseball games as a Mets fan that feel euphoric. This is that feeling. Lindor was great, Scherzer was great, the Verlander stuff was all great. This is another mountaintop that has been climbed, and it feels great.
Yeah, basically, to sum it all up here, LOL Mets is dead. The Family Guy joke is dead. Like this is not the Wilpon Mets anymore. Now this is a Dodger-esque organization where it's not like you're gonna be looking at them every year, like, oh, like what are they gonna do to try and win a World Series?
Yes, and the division is really difficult, by the way. So, I mean, Atlanta Rays, I think, still are a
So,
better team than the
yep.
Mets. Um, I think this moves us ahead of Philly. Philly doesn't worry me too much or bother me. I think what they're going to kind of have to do is just retool entirely. We'll see how Dombrowski does. I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Obviously, the Mets need to do some work on their pitching staff, but like that kind of stuff is like, yeah, no shit, they're going to fix it. Like everyone's like, oh, why did he go to the Mets when Clay Holmes is their number two starter? Yes, man, the Mets are rolling into the season with Clay Holmes as their number two. That's exactly what's going on here. That's exactly what's going to happen. And Clay Holmes isn't even their number two. They have Kodai Senga. They have David Peterson. They have multiple other pitchers. Like stop it. He's not the number two.
Yeah.
And anyways, yeah, it's just amazing to see. I'm just incredibly happy about that. And yeah, well, there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. You also have to talk about here too, like the impact that last season had for the Mets, especially because like you and I
Yes.
discussed it off air with our friend Will, who used to be regular on this podcast, but for legal reasons can't pop on anymore as much. But I do think it's interesting to note here, like if this was like coming off of 2023 and they win 77 games,
Yes.
there's no chance Juan Soto comes, even if they offer him the most money here. And now you have a year where they win 89 games, they make the playoffs, they take the Dodgers like farther than the Yankees did, which John Heyman pointed out on MLB Network again last night. He probably had Yankee fans throwing things at the wall when he made that comment. But I do think it's also interesting to note here, like, this is a spot we can now Soto can look at it and say, hey, like they were very close to the World Series without me. I come here, I can really supercharge this.
Well, that's the thing though too, right? Like they were sorely missing like a super like a regular lefty at bat. Obviously, Lindor is a lefty and a ready switch hitter. But what Lindor, I mean, sorry, what Soto represents and the power that he brings and how much pressure he is going to take off of certain players. I think if the number is right for Pete Alonso, I think he comes back. I think Pete being the cleanup or fifth hitter would be great for this team. I think you could see something like Lindor, Soto, either Vientos or Pete hit third, alternating between three and four if Pete were to come back, and then Nimmo drops to fifth, and then suddenly like Jeff McNeil's your sixth hitter. We'll see what kind of happens with like the other guys. I think also like this, if you get Pete in here. And someone mentioned this, by the way, and I know this will go into next season. Vlad Guerrero, okay,
Yeah.
is a very real possibility here. I think it's solely on what happens with Pete. Maybe Toronto kind of pivots like they were willing to pay Soto, then they're gonna have to pay up for Vladdy. Certainly possible you could stay there, but stuff like that, like that's the domino effect though, too, right? Because it's one thing when you sign Lindor, you keep Lindor. Lindor can attract like some players, like he's a great guy and player that people want to play with, but Soto is like a main attraction. It's a guy where you're maybe say competing with others, and maybe sometimes Steve Cohen doesn't have to actually compete with offers like that are like very similar. This is different circumstances. But when you have the opportunity to sign certain guys like that, the selling point is that much better now for the Mets. It's so much easier to sell guys on coming to play for the New York Mets. You're still in the New York market. It's a great fan base. You're getting paid a shit ton of money, and the team is really good. And they're set up for the long term. Like that's where all these questions that you had into every single Mets offseason for my entire life, they're largely eliminated for the most part. That's the beauty of it. That's what makes you go to bed at night sleeping like a baby for the first time in an entire fandom. It's really insane to me. Um, And this is just the one signing. We haven't even seen the press conferences yet and all this. Mike, I'm not sure about you, but I remember going on Mets.com, MLB.com back in 2004, 2005 when the internet was still relatively new and it was hard to get on the computer to go and check out this stuff. I remember when Billy Wagner was signing, Carlos Beltran was signing, Pedro was signing, all these guys, and when they traded for Delgado and the excitement that I had at that point in time. I it this surpasses it, and it's just been one guy, and that's because it's just more than just the signing. It's an entire seismic shift within the organization that it's sort of like this is the standard now. This is what we carry out. We're here to win a ton of ball games and hopefully multiple World Series. We'll see. Um, and yeah, that's what this move signifies. It's electric. It's honestly one of the best moments ever as a Mets fan.
Yeah, it's also wild to think about too. You look at the situation with, like the Soto signing, like even with how much money they outlaid to him and what they gave to Clay Holmes, what they gave to Frankie Montas,
Yeah.
still under the first luxury tax barrier. It just shows you how much dead money was on that roster already.
Yes, and they could still get rid of Starling Marte's money, which is definitely going to be an interesting fit because you're kind of like, okay, well, does Marte go back to center field? We moved him to right field because we knew he was declining defensively in that position. I think it's going to be very unique to see how that sort of plays out. Um, but you're right though, like they still have money to spend. I think this also like entices guys. I'm not saying Pete or Mania are going to take these sort of pay cuts, but it's still a little bit easier. Like again, where we were saying like when the Mets are in free agency or in comparison to Yamamoto and some other free agents, the Mets have to go higher than other teams to convince players to come. Now, realistically, if the Mets are just in that ballpark number of where these other teams are at, the Mets are the more enticing place. That's that's the part that's best, right? Forget about just Soto and like what he brings. The stuff after that, this kind of stuff, Mania wants to be here. And it's not just like that Soto is here. They've proven that they could fix players, that they put players into the best position possible to have career years. Everyone across the board, for the most part, outside of like Pete, we're having career years. We're changing the entire perception. So, except Nimmo, right? And maybe McNeil for half the year. But in general, like it's so hard. And again, we haven't touched on it too much. It's about who they signed him from and the
Yeah.
season that they had. You were mentioning, I think we were talking about it off air a bunch, where it's like, hey, it's not that I'm like actively rooting against the Yankees. I was actively rooting for the Yankees to have a poor end to their season, no matter how it was going, because I knew that would help increase his chances of Soto. Or I was like, oh shit. Like the Yankees really need to lose the World Series. The Yankees need to lose in embarrassing fashion, lose in like 5 games or less sort of deal in order for this to kind of bode well for the Mets. The second the Mets got in the playoffs, they won that series against Milwaukee. Each time the Mets kept winning, it kept increasing their odds because you're like, holy shit, can you imagine when they get more talent in here? This was a gap year. This was a year that they weren't supposed to be doing any of this. Um, because now at worst, I understand how great Atlanta is, but they're still in prime position to make wild cards and all that sort of stuff and put themselves in those sort of spots. I just think it's just incredible. And again, we didn't have to give up prospects yet. We have like a relatively good farm and there's players to bring up, but the Yankees losing this future Hall of Famer when they don't have that much talent on the team compared to past Yankees teams. It's a gut punch. There's no doubt about it. They could pivot, but the sucker punch blow, just all the attention to the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, couple of things on Bill here. First, your point about the whole like, oh, like let's see, like obviously like the whole idea of like the Mets like can fix guys, and we saw this with Luis Severino. Like he came here off a bad year at the Yankees, signs 1 year at the Mets, has a good year, gets paid $67 million by the A's, who never gave anybody money. And we heard that from Frankie Montas. He's on the Mets too. He's like, like I heard from Sevy and I were raving about the Met process. I wanted to come here and like fix myself and build my value back
Yeah.
up. So like that's something that like is an attractive candidate. I think we talked about it with the pitching market. I think the Mets are going to stay in this kind of aisle for a little bit. They might look for a guy like Managa them innings, but like they don't feel I don't think they feel the need to go pay Corbin Burns or Max Free. I think they want to just
No.
stall until the
Well, I don't think they have to because there's trade options. There's pitchers available next year in free agency. I think guys like Luis Castillo could be available. Um, there was tidbits in Heyman's articles like a couple weeks ago. I was talking to another friend of the podcast, Alan Pines, about this and how they approached Tariq Skubal about an extension. That got nowhere near close to it. I'm not saying Paul Skeens is on the radar too. I think he's still going to be a Pittsburgh Pirate for a little bit, but there's all these like possibilities, and the avenues of getting a pitcher aren't always exclusively through free agency. Sure, there's free agency with the Burns, the Max Frees, obviously Snell's off the board. They're great. They're sort of the cherry on top sort of signings. The Mets don't necessarily need that. I think they just need arms. We got to remember Brandon Sprout is one of these guys as well. We have some other guys in, low A, double A, that have potential for the future. But again, Sean Manaea was awesome. And again, it took a little bit last year for Sean to get it figured out, right? When do we want to say like he really started picking up? We got to say like sometime around like June, right? Around the Grimace era when everything started off. I think that's when Manaea sort of turned the corner. You're talking about 2 months or so of not having a pitcher like that. Now, when we know he's figured everything out mechanically, you get that for the entire season. Um, again, someone like Walker Bueller, I think, is still on the board because we have to also remember the Yankees were having meetings with Fried and Burns, and now I think the Yankees also, in contrast to the Mets, have to be at the top of the market to kind of ease in this blow of this Soto signing to the Mets. Is that Walker Bueller's available? Doesn't look like he's going back to the Dodgers. How many other teams are really going to be that competitive with an offer for someone like him? That's where it sort of gets enticing. I mentioned Luzardo. On the other hand, Crochet, I highly doubt is going to be happening for the Mets. But again, there's other options out there that the Mets could look into and try and add to this team. It doesn't have to exclusively be that big spending money. And again, if you acquire guys that still have a year or two left on their contract, that's huge because it still allows the Mets to have large flexibility for this upcoming season. Because then maybe Tanner Scott's on the board. I'm not saying that he will be, but maybe they go in for another bat. Does someone else like go in for that DH role? Are they able to digest, like sort of this Pete signing? Does Pete sign for 3 to 4 years? Is it a shorter contract with a higher AAV? I think again, you mentioned it earlier, the flexibility possibilities with the Mets it's incredible. And again, you have a guy leading you to do that, and David Stearns, who is a master at it. He is absolutely a master at this sort of stuff. And by the way, it's funnier that how the amount of money that he spent with the Milwaukee Brewers was $763 million over the course of his entire tenure there, and he just spent 765 on one player.
Yep, it is here. And another pitching possibility we haven't talked about too much, but I can throw out here now. Like
Mm.
the sales pitch of Roki Sasaki gets a lot better with Juan Soto on
And
board.
he was just posted, yeah. So that's a good reminder. Yeah, I think that helps.
He's probably not coming here, but like it gives you, I think it ups their odds.
I think it ups their odds 100%. I think you're right with that. As far as like the Padres and the Dodgers, I still totally understand geographically. It makes more sense. Maybe something Senga, please, can kind of help out. And again, the Mets are sort of looming there. I think a Roki Sasaki signing would be insane. I think that would be, I think out of all the moves, right, that kind of seems somewhat realistic because we don't think Burns are freed, right? So a Sasaki would be like the next best thing besides Manaea, right? Like because Pete is awesome, he's lovable for a lot of Mets fans, and him signing back would be great. It's not like, oh my God, like really on top of that Soto signing. It would just be a very happy sort of feeling the same with Manaea, but like Sasaki is this sort of like, oh my God, like what's happening? Like it can get even better than this. Are you serious? So, and again, the money wouldn't even be that again would just add to the flexibility of the New York Mets. We'll see what ends up happening with that. I'm not overly optimistic, but the odds are up now for
Yeah,
that sort of move.
yeah. I personally am ticketing Sasaki with the Padres because he has that big relationship with you,
Mm.
Darvish. I feel like that's the spot he's going to end up in. I don't think the Dodgers is as for its whole. I think the Padres are the top team for Sasaki. I think the Mets are probably like at best third right now, but I think they went up from where they were. Okay.
I would say so as well. There's been a lot of like industry reports from guys saying like, hey, the Padres are actually the one in the driver's seat He has a really good relationship with Yu Darvish. Um, Again, this that could go to January 23rd, as Heyman has mentioned. The window runs. It's going to start tomorrow at 5 p.m. and that'll be open through the 23rd. So we'll see. And Morosi had just said that all signs pointing to him signing with an MLB team between January 15th and January 23rd. So we'll kind of see something drag out for quite some time. So yeah.
Yeah. Now the couple other questions I want to get to before we bounce you. Obviously, number one, the position players, I feel like I get impact by this. Like I know you said maybe they trade Starling Marte. I think one thing we forgot about, I think we have to remember here is that like one of Juan Soto's best friends in baseball is Starling Marte, and we've seen the relationship these two have here. I don't think it's a good sign, good faith from the Mets to immediately trade Marte when they sign Juan Soto. So I don't. I think he's more likely to stay. I think you're more likely looking like a you're moving somebody off this core. I think Jeff McNeil's more likely to move at this point than Marte, especially Marte's 1 year left.
I've always thought Jeff was like a big trade piece too. I've thought that both of them, Marte logistically makes the most, literally, out of the two, and just the year left. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, the Mets become flexible. You know, like they would put Pete at DH on certain days. Like I'm sure they could put Soto at DH at times. Maybe move Marte to right field. We know Siri is going to be involved as well. Maybe Siri and Marte are splitting time in center field now. Nimmo obviously has plantar fasciitis. That stuff could act up in the middle of the season. Again, I think the Mets are sort of doing a good job of allowing someone like Drew Gilbert more time now. Like, what's the rush for Drew Gilbert to come up, right? If Marte and Siri are in front of you.
And
Uh,
Tyrone Taylor.
and Taylor will be like kind of all over the place. The depth that they have defensively in the outfield, and it's going to be funny because people will be like, "Oh, Soto this, Soto," and it's like, okay, well, like we have really good players here that could fill in these corners. And listen, Soto is subpar. He's going to only get worse in the outfield. I think there's no denying that. However, this is Ted Williams.
You take that.
It's Ted Williams. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? It's one of the best players that has ever been available, and they got him. You figure it out. That's the luxury of it, right? That's how you figure that shit out because you got a great baseball player. You got one of the best hitters of all time. If you factor in errors and how difficult it is in Major League Baseball in modern times. Um, yeah, that's why that signing is so great. That's why who's even thinking about 765 million when you have that sort of flexibility that makes literally everyone else on your team better.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah. Like I said, also, I think Marte, I think, has a home on this team because, again, like he can play. If you're not give Soto a DH day, Marte can play. Like, if you the DH is like
Yeah.
Marte's there most of the week, and then a couple of days like he's at the outfield, maybe you DH Soto a game, you DH Pete a game. Like, I feel like there's gonna be ways to use that spot to rest guys. I think is Marte's a big part of that.
Yeah, listen, I like Marte. I just again, I've expressed this many a times. I think he's very sensible in trading. But again, if you can like I don't care. Like I love McNeil. I like Marte. They're good Mets. They did everything that was asked of them. However, if there's an ability to acquire a pitcher, and the Mets have to pay a portion of either of those two players' contracts to get that pitcher in, I'm all for it because the Mets have players in all of those positions that you could use. Like it just. Like it's just funny to me that, the Mets really aren't starved in multiple positions. Middle infield's great. Who knows how Acuna turns out, how Jet Williams turns out, but they got a taste of what Acuna could be. Do they get Iglesias back as well? Like if they trade McNeil, I think that sort of side. And again, I think I forgot who reported it, but they said they were unlikely to trade Jeff McNeil. I know we kind of shared that report. The name is escaping me on who had it, but it's still not a guarantee. But I think it really depends on the price. We got to see what Crochet goes for.
Yeah.
Put it that way, right?
Yeah.
If Tristan Cassis were to go into a deal, and I don't think the Red Sox would do this. I think it would be stupid of the Red Sox. Um, but if Cassis were to go the other way for Crochet, like that's it. It's a wrap. The Mets aren't going to be able to trade for someone else. The price will be astronomical. I think it's Marcelo Mayer, I believe his name is
Yeah.
one of those and Abreu as well, the other Red Sox prospect. Those are the guys that will be headlining for Crochet. It'll be interesting. I think Seattle or Miami are a couple of those teams that the Mets could call up.
Yeah, I got another one I could throw at you. This is from earlier in the offseason. This rumor came around. I think this makes more sense now given the layout of the team here. The Mets and Diamondbacks link up on that Jeff McNeil for Jordan Montgomery trade.
I mean, Jeff goes to the outfield in Arizona. I mean, they got the best second baseman in baseball, or one of, in Marte. So
He plays basically all over the place for Arizona, and they get out of the Montgomery money.
I'm not sure. I think I'd rather just sign Sean Manaea. I could easily see the
I, I,
Montgomery. If
I,
I'm trading Jeff McNeil, go attach prospects and go for Luis Castillo.
yeah,
That's just my personal preference. Montgomery could have a bounce back year. I'm not fully convinced. I also saw we were linked to Evaldi, by the way. That
yeah.
was one of the names that came up.
Yeah, I know they're in that tier of like where they're looking for guys to sort of fill out because I think they're looking at the six-man rotation most like more often than not to protect Senga, as he comes back from those injuries. And it's important to remember here. I think like the six-man I think makes sense for them, but I don't think you want to. It doesn't make even less sense to go get a big guys. You're limiting the big guy starts if you're doing the six-man. Whereas like if you have a bunch of guys who are similar in quality to each other, that balances it out more.
Yeah. And that's the kind of difficult thing. Um, because you just really don't know at the end of the day. Like they could say that they're going with a six-man rotation, but God forbid Senga gets hurt again, then what? You're kind of back to five. Um, and again, they're really like not married to the idea of Clay Holmes also being a starter, right? Like they're like, okay, yeah, well, we have some flexibility. Worst case, we have one of the better setup men in baseball. So yeah, to me, just we got to look out. I think there's so many options here. It's exciting. I don't think we're gonna see something that's that negative of a move. And yeah, I just from here on out, I hope to see a lot of deals move quickly. I don't want Major League Baseball to do the same old garbage where we still have to wait. Like, one signing happens in the NBA, the rest happen.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned NHL is a little similar. We see that with the NFL. Major League Baseball, get to it, guys. Let's see some signings at the winter meetings, trades as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the Mets have a lot of work to do still. Obviously, they need to get more pitching. They have the Pete Alonso thing. They have bullpen needs. You could look at another bench guy theoretically to help spread the roster out here. Like, what do you think is next for them?
I think everyone is inclined to believe that next is Pete Alonso or that first base position. I'm also inclined to believe the same thing. Um, Again, we're kind of far removed at this point from being in those emotions of Pete Alonso and what he did in the postseason. And I think it was huge for him. I think a lot of where Pete is, and obviously players like him decline in their 30s, but players like Pete have a lot of pressure on themselves, or Pete is that type of guy to put all that pressure. Once that pressure is off, this is a relaxed Pete Alonso is a very dangerous hitter, a very good player, or hitter for that matter. It's just about getting him in that situation. And I think signing a guy like Soto, seeing the emergence of Vientos, it takes the pressure off of him because he puts that on himself because when he came up, he was the guy. He was like the only guy. McNeil was good and they had some other guys, but largely we know Pete has been that sort of player since he came up to the Mets in 2018. So Pete has his work cut out for him to sort of solidify himself as a guy that the Mets have to keep, and I think that's where they're moving. And then I'll see starting pitcher as well. And again, all these like other like relief pitcher arms and everything. I don't think they're going to the Tanner Scotts of the world. I think they're going to go other guys that they see are pretty good that they'll pay a decent price for and hope the upside ticks.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. I said to a friend off the air last night because somebody was arguing about two bullpen. I'm like, the Mets under Stearns will never spend big on bullpen arms. You go mark this down, wait till about January 15th. The Mets will sign a bunch of guys to like 1 year contracts to like try and fill the unit out.
I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, that's the way it should work anyways. Like, why are you burning like millions of dollars where you could also bring up guys through your minor league system if you know how to develop them properly into relief pitchers? We saw it happen all the time in Milwaukee. Like, that's the power of David Stearns. Like, And again, I think the philosophy in Major League Baseball has always been and should always be you spend big on bats and you try and develop the pitchers as best you can. The Mets were always great at developing pitchers. They never would pay up or even honestly also develop hitters at the same time. That is slowly changing. Mets still need work in that lineup. Do not get me wrong. Alvarez needs to have a bounce back year. Nimmo needs to have a bounce back year. Whoever plays second needs to step it up. Whatever happens at first, like there's still question marks around here. Not really that worried about the outfield. I think the outfield is completely settled now. Shortstop is settled. I think second base will be exciting at the very least. We're looking at Jeff McNeil there and other players, or it'd be Jose Iglesias and some of these other young players. First base could be whatever, Vientos at third. Worst case, I mean, we'll see what happens with Ronnie Mauricio. Beatty, does Beatty get traded? I think Beatty could definitely headline some sort of move for another player. Yeah, I think it's going to be that. I think it's just going to be very exciting because there's so many more moves to come for the Mets, and Soto was just the start.
Yeah, it's also helps a lot for these young kids too, who no longer have to go up and say, "Oh, I'm the savior of the team." Whereas, like we had some of the Mets prospects sort of wield under that pressure in recent years. Now you,
When was the last time you could even say that about the Mets?
yeah,
Really, like maybe when Lasting's Millage came up, that there was like little to no pressure. Even then, there was a ton of pressure for him because he's like, the Mets had developed Wright and Reyes, and they needed this outfield sort of guy that they've developed. And the only good outfielder that they developed has been like Brandon Nimmo and I guess Conforto to an extent.
yeah,
But
before destroyed his shoulder, but that was the last time they held a good outfielder.
yes, yes, and Nimmo was like came up around as similar to he came up after technically Conforto did. So, um, yeah, I mean, listen, man, it's exciting overall, and I hope the Mets continue to make these great moves.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll touch on here is obviously I'm gonna have a Yankee spot this week also. We can see what happens to them here. But like we talked about this a little bit here. The Yankee situation here now, like it's very fascinating to watch what happens to them because obviously they had this whole thing in their mind about how like, oh, we're the Yankees, like Juan Soto's gonna play like all the pinstripes, Leafs, and Money Tail. Like they knew they were not gonna have the highest bid with Cohen,
Yeah.
how they motivated to get him, but like the fact that now like this is not I don't think the Yankee fans realize this and they're sort of like
Mhm.
lashing out on social media and everywhere you see this like
Yeah.
this was not Aaron Judge leaving who was born like into the pinstripes. He grew up as a kid there. Like he left money on the table. He loved it.
People don't.
It was this is Juan Soto's third team. He was there for a year. And like if the Yankees were close, you could make the argument if you like his time there, but I think clearly he saw something there that inspired him to, pick up like leave shop and come
I
on.
think that's the part of like the common Yankee fan today, or certain Yankees fans don't understand. Okay, and I root for a team in AC Milan that used to be like literal top dog, like big guy available, best player around. Okay, yeah, we'll buy him. No problem. That's what we do. That's how we do things here. And then that slowly started to deteriorate over time, and it caught up to them, and they're not what they used to be. And they're not gonna, the Yankees are not gonna fall to where they are, right? It's a completely different sport. Um, so is the landscape of it. But the Yankees and some of their fans need to come to grips with reality is that they're phenomenal. They haven't had a losing season in over 30 years. I'm not here to rip on the Yankees. I'm not saying they're a bad franchise. They're not at all. They haven't been that. They're still a staple organization. They do a lot of things poorly compared to what they used to and how they juggle that. But they're not everybody loves to play for the Yankees. Not everybody is going to take discount money to play for the Yankees. Aaron Judge took less money because he is a Yankees. He grew up in that farm. He has been the best player that they've developed since Jeter. Probably better. Like we got to go back to like Mickey Mantle, like how good this guy is. And the reality was they were able to keep him because of those things. Not everyone is like that. Soto said no to the team that signed him as a teenager, and they offered him over 400 million when
Yeah.
he was 24. They offered him mega money. He was always going to free agency. He was always going to look for the top dollar. Did the same thing with San Diego. It's just very funny to me how at the end of the day, and there's a lot of Yankees fans that are sensible and understand this because when they didn't go and get someone like Harper or Machado, they prevented themselves from doing this. And I think the very funniest pivot of it all is that the Yankees can be okay. The Yankees can be really good next year. They can do some moves that would allow them to have so much luxury tax and space if they dump someone like Stroman, get other signings in there. Because listen, as great as Juan Soto is, he's still just one player, and one player isn't the difference between them going and not going to the World Series. They were going, I think, regardless, because I think the AL was that weak, and he's awesome. But you can replace not in the aggregate, you're never going to replace Juan Soto, but you could add a lot of good players. They're also getting bad players off of their book or old players like Rizzo and Torres. They're not interested in bringing back. The Yankees have the ability to do that. But all I hear and read from a Yankees fans' friends and what you see on the internet, and I'm not sure if you heard this, they're like, we don't trust them to make moves for other short-term free agents. Like, oh, we don't trust them to sign Christian Walker for 3 to 4 years and the other players in the other spots and for these deals that are for cheaper players. Then it's like, okay, then why do you want Brian Cashman to stay?
Yeah, they don't.
Then why don't you just fire the GM if you don't trust him?
Well, if you've listened to them, they haven't want, they want him out for years, but
So
they do.
a good amount of them have, and then the others like still call him a god. Cashman's still great at his job, but let's face it, they had a lot of shit backfire for them. And a lot of stuff still could backfire because they're sitting here saying, let's build around Cole and Judge. Cole is in his mid to late 30s
Both
now.
35 and
We've already seen an injury for him. We've seen a bit of a decline. He's a great pitcher. He's probably going to be a Hall of Famer by like modern era metrics, right?
I hate to interrupt, but do not forget that he did the whole opt-out thing and did not want to give him the extra year, which is another
Yeah,
like
exactly. That's what I'm that exactly. So like they're still like married to him for a few more years. Judge, love the guy. It's impossible to hate him. I think he's a consummate professional. I really feel bad for how his performances have gone in the postseason, but he's still 32 with an injury record. A scary one for one of the literally the largest human being to ever play baseball. And so I'm not like rooting for it or anything, but I would be terrified on a year-to-year basis for him because one major injury to that guy, and I'm really not rooting for it at all. I love him. I hope he's healthy for the rest of his career. But one major injury, Mike, to Aaron Judge,
we saw what happened in 23 when he got hurt.
it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And I hope he's okay because we've seen Giancarlo deteriorate. Two Giancarlos, and again, I didn't even mention Giancarlo. Giancarlo postseason heroics, it's great. He was relatively healthy. Dude, he's only getting older.
Yep.
It's I think it's a dire situation. They need guys like Volpe, Wells, Spencer Jones, and Jason Dominguez to all flourish, not be decent baseball players. They need to flourish. At least two of them need to be all-stars,
Yeah.
perennial all-stars. And I'm not convinced that one of them will be. I like Wells, I like Volpe. Are any of them great or special like a Judge? No, not even saying Judge's level, but like
Well,
you know
again,
what I mean
I
here.
think
Like
they have good players. I don't know like if they're going to become like these great homegrown superstars where
Like, is Anthony Volpe, in your opinion,
he's not the best shortstop in his own division.
he's
He's
not
not.
even going to be better than like a Robinson Cano.
Yeah, I was saying in his own division, like he's not turning into Gunnar Henderson. That's not happening.
No, he's not even close to Gunner. And Volpe's like a fine player.
Yeah, he's like,
Austin Wells like might have the best upside relative to his position.
yeah. I think honestly, like it feels like Volpe is going to be on the Glaber track where he's a very good player who gets underappreciated by the Yankee fans because of his expectation level.
Because yeah, exactly, because he doesn't live up to their expectations. I don't know. I think Volpe's being so young and so talented. I think he'll be okay. I think he'll figure it out. I think the pop needs to come back because I think he was projected for more pop. We saw a little bit more power in that rookie season. Across the board, he was better. I think he's a good defensive player. I think he's got a good heart. The moment didn't seem too big for him in the World Series. I know he's very inconsistent. I think he's so young, you can't judge Anthony Volpe, but I do like him long term.
Yeah, he's also
I was
under
like,
massive pressure because this is also the same guy the Yankees passed on like every great shortstop hit the market for years for because they said this guy's
yes,
be the best
yes,
player in the sport and he's not.
exactly, and that's a Cashman thing. And one of the last things I guess I'll say is this is Jason Dominguez isn't going to get anywhere near what Yankees fans think.
That,
Jason Dominguez is not like dude is never going to place top five for an MVP. I just like the fact that like we're sitting here like or the Yankees fans are sitting there for the large part. Oh, the Martian, like they haven't compared this guy in his bat speed. Like, dude, they were comparing Clint Frazier's bat speed to Mickey Mantle.
Yeah.
Clint never did shit. Andujar never did anything.
They also told you what they thought last year when we had Alex Verdugo basically be the worst regular in baseball for about 4 months, and they didn't bother calling Dominguez up till September.
Well, Dominguez, outside of the injury, came back in the middle of the year, to be fair, but they refused to bring him up when they could have.
Yeah.
I think that's the more fair point you were making because, yeah, Verdugo was dog water at a certain point. He was horrible. And Jason, like the rumors were, he doesn't like left field too much. He prefers center field. It looks like it'll be going to be their center fielder for opening day. If all goes well, but really? Like that's what they're hinging some of the stuff on. They need to go and get Cody Bellinger or Christian Walker. They need to dump Stroman. They need to get at least one starter. They need to refortify that bullpen. Is Luke Weaver a guarantee to be great? Luke
Yeah.
Weaver had a slow, or not a slow, a small stretch of good play.
Yeah. Also, the other thing I'll note here at the Yankees too is like obviously not getting Soto like, backfires badly because I think if they had gotten him for the money they got him for, Yankee fans would have let them off the pass. Like, okay, like I get it, you
They
gave
weren't going to go that far over the tax. You're going to say the
yeah,
310,
yeah,
right?
you're not gonna go that far over. I was like, your off season for, if you did that was gonna be Paul Goldschmidt at first base, like a couple of pen arms, maybe a step starter. Yankees would have been okay with that because you're gonna have Juan Soto back. But now that Hal has shown, I'm willing to spend that much money. And they're not going to spend anywhere near that much money in aggregate. They probably spend maybe like 500 total, I think, in terms of giving out contracts. I just think like now the pressure is on. It's like you lost the best player we've had in a long time outside of Judge to the Mets, and now you're not going to give me, five good players to replace to help fill the gaps. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think the pressure's out on them now because also that offer's out there. They know what they offered for Soto, so it's sort of like, okay, like what you were saying, like how do we not reinvest all of this? Because again, like, that's why I say like the Yankees, like the outlook isn't that bad. I think the Mets have a great outlook. I think there is obviously a case for the long term that the Mets could have a better outlook than the Yankees. However, the Yankees still have, they're fine. They're fine. It's realistically, their mega stars staying healthy, which is a fair question mark. The other youngsters coming up and playing well enough.
And,
Um,
and building depth
I
around
forget
them.
this thing. And they have to nail free agency. They have to. They have to get Cody Bellinger. They have to, acquire like somebody via trade. I mean, Devin Williams.
Or sign
And
Tanner Scott.
eh, Tanner Scott. Yeah, I mean, listen, Devin Williams, the stuff too is like the Yankees making a trade is worrisome, I would say. The Yankees have to do this via free agency. Trade wise, I think it's limited because you still gave up Thorpe and Michael King for Soto. Now you don't have that. You've dumped other guys via trades. Your farm is like so.
Well, they had to make the Soto trade also. Like
They
that.
had to. They had to. The Soto trade, like, my God, like the revisionism on it is like the funniest shit ever because it was the biggest layup of a deal I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, can you give up two guys that might have some upside as pitchers for a future Hall of Famer that you could also extend if all goes well? Oh, yeah. I mean, no one else was having the ask or the players that the Padres were looking for, right? Because they were looking for controllable, high upside arms. They got that. The Mets didn't have that at the time. That's why I was very worrisome the second he got traded there was because, like, okay, well, is he really going to leave the Yankees like that? And the unfathomable happened. The Mets signed a future Hall of Famer in his prime from the New York Yankees.
Yeah. And they went to a World Series. So like it's the first time in 15
Yes.
years of Juan Soto. So it's not like they got nothing out of the trade. It's just a matter of the fact that like they did not have the will to go past to go win a bidding war with Steve Cohen, which would be very hard, even if they wanted to.
Yeah. And exactly. So, just seeing the DeComo stuff this morning, he if you want me to have a quote unquote a breaking quote from him, he says the Mets are far from done. That is the part where why Juan Soto signed with the Mets. He believes in their vision. Dot dot dot. Gonna have to listen to the entire clip from DeComo, but that's more of a reassuring like the Mets are, it's not like, oh yeah, the Mets are gonna make some moves here or there. I don't know, maybe something big happens soon. Maybe they surprise us with one of the pitchers. We haven't heard that they met with a Fried or a Burns, right? Or linked to. Not saying that they're going to do that, but I
You
think the
never.
only starting, the big starting pitching names that they were linked to were Manaea and Bueller, correct?
Yeah, Mania, Bueller. We heard of all the obviously you mentioned earlier here. Like they're saying he's staying away from that QO type long term $200 million plus pitcher because I think they want to develop their own.
So you still don't. I know you and Will weren't really believers of Walker and Manaea. I'm not completely. I don't think that's out the window. I think they could definitely do both.
I think they would rather do both of them than like go give Corbin Burns $200 million.
I love Burns. I think he's great, but yeah, I like the Burns 200 for a guy like a pro in 30 or approaching 30. Like I'm good. He's great, but he's not like Cole.
The
He's not
only
like when Garrett Cole hit the
the
free agent.
only way I could see this scenario happen with Corbin Burns is if they do something stupid where they give him like a very short deal with very high yearly salaries. They try and do like if they give
Three for 120.
if they give him like the Verlander Scherzer contract, that's the only way I could see them being on a guy like Corbin Burns. They have mitigate their downside risk.
I could see that. I agree with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens with the Mets going forward here. We have very interesting follow up now that they have landed one of the top five hitters in the sport in record setting contract. Martino, thanks all the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to follow you on social media, how can I do that?
Yeah, you can just follow me at Martino Puccio everywhere at Martino_Puccio on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, obviously on Twitter. Just follow that Milan podcast. Gonna obviously be doing more American sports content, really staying away from the New York Jets in general, but it's all Mets, baby, and it's been incredible, and I'm so excited to watch the winter meetings unfold as, I guess the kings of the offseason in a very positive way for the first time, and God knows how long.